Good morning and welcome to Japanese Politics 101 with Timothy Langley, Chief Executive Officer and Representative Director of Langley Squire, and me, your host, Maya Matsuoka. Today we're going to talk about the vaccines rollout, the Olympics, the national politics, China and the region. Of course, we're going to start with the Tokyo elections and how Ms. Koike has been doing so far.
Kind of get started. The hottest thing to talk about today is the Tokyo Metropolitan elections. And I guess people are aware of that, but to me it seemed to be a very toned down election cycle. Elections for the 127 seats runs for 10 days, and the culmination is today. So there is no election campaigning on election day, and results will be pouring in and pretty much announced tonight. It's more important in terms of what parties are doing well rather than the individuals. So there are 127 seats. That means that there are probably close to 450 candidates for those seats. And the major distribution is with the party that was established by the current governor, Yuriko Koike, a party that she calls Tomin First, which is interesting because that was right around the time that Trump came up with, Make America Great Again and, America First. So there was a real desire to identify the people who were in the election district to take preeminence in how decisions are being made. This was generated not so much, but it had an influence that the Tokyo Olympics were going to be held in Tokyo. Tokyo was going to be paying for a portion of it, and so they should have a bigger say, and the Tokyoites are the ones who are going to maybe benefit, but mostly suffer from the fact that the Olympics are here, so we need to have a bigger voice. So Tomin First was launched and was very successful. It is currently the most powerful voice in the Tokyo Metropolitan Assembly, but it's in flux right now, and it's in flux for a lot of different reasons. So the number 2 party is the LDP, the number 3 party is Komeito. And then there are some other parties that are minor but influential. The big ones are LDP and Komeito, particularly in national government, where they actually form a coalition. The Tokyo government, they don't necessarily form a coalition. And in fact, when the election was held for the last election 4 years ago, Koike formed a coalition with Komeito to capture as many seats as possible. And this went fairly well, but they got kind of tired of each other in the waning 4 years. And also it seems that Ms. Koike has kind of gotten tired of her Tomin First as well. And you can see that in a couple of ways. One is that she's not really a standard bearer for Tomin First, and in fact, she's not even the leader of the party. She is, quote unquote, senior advisor to the party. So she stepped down as the titular head of the party. And secondly, you can see it in that she doesn't really promote exclusively the Tomin First candidates. She supports just about any candidate individually who at least purports to support the policies that she is promoting. So she's somewhat ambidextrous and not like a frothing at the mouth, Tomin First, let's make this party the best party and this is the only party. So as a result, the cohesion within the group is not that strong. And the curious thing about her taking a leave of absence just at the time when we started to go into the election cycle, you'll remember that she kind of called in sick and went to the hospital and get the doctor's note, and she was completely out throughout the entire election cycle except for Friday. She came into the office. She had a press conference. She said some nice things, but she wasn't out on the campaign trail, and that's got to hurt candidates. And I think in the backdrop, maybe this is something she had already seen coming. I don't know. I can't read more into the fact that she didn't. That she just kind of called in sick. She is really good at a lot of different things, and one of the things she's good at, and this is not meant in a negative way, is theatrics and presentation. She's really good at that. She was at one time an actress in her career, so she knows how to use TV. She knows how to use mass media, and a lot of speculation was put that this would generate a kind of a sympathy vote for her. She's come out in public on Friday, also yesterday, and she does look a little bit tired. So there might be something to that, and she has been running a large metropolitan, one of the largest cities in the world, and that's got to be draining. She's been a successful governor, no scandals that have tainted her when it's really brought down the other three governors before her. So on that scale, you can say that she's been successful, but it does look like the sun is beginning to set on Tomine first. Most analysts have predicted today will be a great win for the LDP. When they did a poll on Thursday, 31% of the people polled said that they were going to vote for LDP. 14% said that they were going to vote for Komeito, and 12% said that they would vote for Tomine. So that leaves, let's say of the 120 seats that are open, and with even though she's popular, the seats diminish, and Tomine's 46 seats diminishes remarkably. It could put a lot of pressure on her for taking blame for that. And there's been a lot of speculation. I don't know if Cloud is in the room. Cloud asked last week about the possibility of her becoming prime minister. And this comes up quite a lot. It's kind of like navel gazing. It's interesting to think about and exercises your brain cells and all of the permutations that could possibly go into that. But it just, once again, I hope you don't mind, and I hope it doesn't become a reality, because I would really have another hat that I'm eating. I seem to have a diet of hats every once in a while. That the calculations for her becoming a prime minister are just so far-fetched. There would have to be so many things that would fall into place. But it's something that is fun to speculate about. But the easier speculation is what's right in front of you. Mr. Abe is right in front of you. Mr. Suga is right in front of you. Less so, Mr. Kono is in front of you, but it's the more obvious things. So these things will be determined by incidents like today, like the election of the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. So it is something to watch very carefully. There's a lot of infighting with the LDP internally. That the fact that the Tokyo Metropolitan Government wins or loses the LDP, Komeito, the coalition there, is encouragement. It's not quite suggestive yet, but it's encouragement to what the national election will be when the Prime Minister finally closes down the House in September. Looks like September that will happen. Could be October, but I'll talk about that later. Anyway, we've talked enough about Tokyo metropolitan elections. I'd like to close this part and open the room up for any observations or questions. And I can't tell, maybe Maya can tell, when the room is starting to fill up with at least 60% of our normal capacity, and then we can start really getting into the bones of this. So with that, any comments or observations?
Well, it seems that we can continue.
Okay, crickets. Okay, so let's move on to vaccines. So that's another hot topic. So we'll go from kind of hot to medium hot, and then we'll end it up with a talk about Mr. Suga and the infighting that's going on in the LDP and what Mr. Suga's current status is. So let's talk about vaccines. It's been up and down and back and forth, and we have lots of vaccines, and we didn't know we had that many vaccines in storage, and sorry about that. And now we're going to start inoculating people, and nobody wants to get inoculated. We don't have the nurses, and oh my God, what are we going to do about that? And now we don't have the what are they called? The syringes that handle 4 shots, 5 shots. We've got to do that. What a mess. And it looks like we're having yet another mess beginning to bubble. So what I'm talking about is there was a great rollout. Finally, Kono Taro was asked by the Prime Minister to please weigh in and get this thing kicked off. He was given discretion to talk with the Minister of Defense. They enlisted the SDF, and they set up mass inoculation centers. Very successful, very quick. Had the SDF managing this and started putting injections into the older citizens, the 60 and older, the most vulnerable of the population. That went great guns, and just in a matter of 3 weeks or so, they began to allow other people to come in, and even people who didn't have an appointment to come in. So they were going great guns, far surpassing what the municipal centers were doing. And then comes Friday, there were a couple of announcements. One was that Kono Taro said, we know that we invited all of the companies and universities and large organizations to host vaccine centers, but we need to kind of back off on that. So no more applications there. We have applications that have been submitted. Those are in process now, and we will probably start accepting those for initiation on August 9th. So keep an eye out on that. So no more new applications, but the ones that have come in, we will accept. That's kind of strange. It's like kind of move forward and then step back, which does not send a lot of credible signals to the population. The other thing that was said was the SDF mass inoculation centers will be winding down, but if you're coming in for your second shot, you're guaranteed to get that. So we're going to keep the centers open, but we're going to be winding those down because we're beginning to experience a supply shortage, which is almost shocking to hear because there has been lots of news about oversupply and about pallets of vaccines that have been stored and they didn't know that they were there, and now they're going to circulate them. Also, the donation to Taiwan, 1.2 million doses to Taiwan 2 weeks ago, and now there was just an announcement that they would donate 3 million to Pacific Island nations. This is, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. You have to scratch your head and wonder, what is going on, and you guys are supposed to know what you're doing. So it's kind of a funny situation. In terms of the geopolitics of it, it's really interesting because they just announced that they would be donating 3 million to the Pacific Island nations. So they had a 9-nation meeting last week in which the Prime Minister participated. Usually this 9-nation meeting is hosted by Japan. They did it virtually this time. And it's for kind of like the free and open Indo-Pacific. All of the island nations in the region participate. 14 Pacific Island nations, New Zealand and Australia, and French Polynesia and New Caledonia, which is kind of strange because they're French administered, but it's fine. They're in the region, and the whole thrust here is we need to be talking to each other and helping each other to keep the shipping lanes open and to keep this out of China's hands. At the same time, China is developing projects with these countries, with Fiji, with the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, doing projects, sea projects, fishing villages, things like that. So there is this tension and this competition that's going on, and the Japanese said we will be giving aid and doses to the Pacific Islands, but a couple of the when you're giving with one hand, you're taking away with the other, but the people who are receiving also have a say in this, and the Prime Minister in Japan were quizzed. I thank you very much for the doses of vaccine and the money that goes with it, because we need better medical facilities. You're going to be giving us this and that, and this is all in the backdrop of the Chinese doing the same thing. So it's kind of a battle of hearts, and it's uncomfortable when you're doing that, when one of the beneficiaries of your largesse says, well, we like what you're giving us, but you could be giving us more. And by the way, this dumping of water in Fukushima, could you be a little bit more specific about that? So you can see that there's could you please shut up, and yes, we'll give you a little bit more, just keep that voice down a little bit. So you see that going on. This is real politics being played out in real time. The Chinese are doing it, the Japanese are doing it, the Americans are doing it. And at this level, with vaccines, you can see it just kind of rolling out. You've got to read a little bit in between the lines, but it's so interesting on inoculation and the power of the Wuhan virus as it is infected our region, and the ability of the Chinese to kind of exercise a little bit more of their desires. So it's a little bit off base in terms of vaccines that are going on in Japan. The rollout is continuing. In fact, the slope of inoculations is remarkable. I mean, far more remarkable than in any of the other advanced countries. So for so long, Japan was in, kind of not a laughing stock, but being pointed out as how come it's so slow? They're supposed to be so technical. They've been able to manage everything, including counting all the trees in Tokyo. How come they can't do this right? And then they finally got their act together. And as most of us know who live here, once they get their act together and they've finished having all the hundreds of meetings to understand, where they're going to put the coffee maker, they've figured these things out. And the slope, the speed of incorporation into the entire Japanese archipelago has been just remarkable. So there are some good things going on, but all of this wouldn't happen at this pace if it were not for the Olympics, which is my next topic. So with that, I'd like to close this off and see if there are any comments or inclusions from the audience.
At any time, please let us know by raising your hand that you would like to talk. Yes, we've got Ren. Okay. Good morning, Ren. Thank you very much for coming up.
Good morning.
Hi, Ren.
Good morning, Timothy. Hi. Timothy, thank you for many what that you described, but I would like to know why. Do you have some information about why it's such a mess? They couldn't get the house together?
Because it's Japan?
Well, that means many different things.
Yes.
So.
The why of the inoculations and the vaccines, is that the question?
Yes, you mentioned that they couldn't get the house together. They are supposed to know this. How come you didn't know? We had extra storage. All these things are shocking to me, and these are the whats. And I'm curious as to know why that was the case.
Yeah, it is very curious. So it's also very curious that maybe 3 weeks ago, we talked about it here in this room. All of a sudden, they found these pallets of vaccine that nobody knew was there. And that was disturbing, because part of the reason was we don't have the vaccines. We can't roll it out. There are a lot of reasons why they couldn't roll it out. And they needed to solve those one by one. and sometimes they just, I think it's just overload. The administrative government is not set up to deal with those kinds of massive issues. We've seen that with Fukushima and some of the disasters. You would think the Japanese are much better at it, that they're much more reactive and much more in sync. So that's why it causes people like us that are in this room. We love this country and we're analysts of what's going on. To figure out why and how, it's just so counterintuitive. But I don't have the real answer for you, Ren.
But thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just let me know. Let me say that when you come up onto the stage, I will mute your mic while other people are talking. So once you start talking, please unmute it and yes, just let us know your thoughts. So I'm sorry, this probably looks and sounds a little bit offensive, and I'm sorry for doing this, but this is for...
You're such a Nazi.
I am, yes, for recording purposes. So please forgive me about this, for this. Okay, so, and thank you very much, Ren. Stephen, good morning and thank you for coming up on stage.
Hi, good morning, Maya and Timothy and everyone. Thank you very much for another interesting discussion. I just wanted to lend some insight into the vaccine diplomacy that's going on in the Pacific Islands in Southeast Asia on behalf of Japan.
Great.
I think it's really critical for us to be thinking about why Japan is investing at this time, and it's doing it unilaterally. That means from Japan to these regions, but also through the COVAX program, so in an international program where it's trying to distribute vaccines to these two regions. Now, Timothy, you used the word geopolitics, and I think the geopolitics are very serious in terms of these two regions. China has been able to provide Sinovac to Indonesia and Thailand and really make some headways in terms of its, soft power into Southeast Asia. And Japan has huge worries about that because it's invested a lot of energy, financial resources, and diplomatic resources in terms of trying to secure that region and build the region so it has what we call more strategic autonomy, so it can operate more independently from China. So Japan has been proactively trying to deliver vaccines to both all these countries so that, again, these countries can have more strategic autonomy. The Pacific Islands are quite interesting as well. Again, China has invested a huge amount of resources into the region, but Japan historically considers these islands, part of, its cultural background. And if you're an honest historian and anthropologist, you know that many of some of the people from that region did make their ways to Japan many centuries ago. But Japan sees this region as a really important partnership in terms of marine resources, in terms of future energy resources, but also thinking about these countries working with Japan to support its signature free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. So really Japan's engagement in both regions is about geopolitics, it's about balancing China, but it's not doing it alone. It's doing it through the COVAX program, as well as using its own long-time engagement within both regions to provide some support. So I just wanted to provide some extra background there. Great discussion, and thanks again to both Maya and Timothy.
Thank you very much, Stephen. For those of you who don't know, Stephen had a terrific article, front page Japan Times, last Monday. So if you don't know him, please follow him. Please link up with him. And Stephen, please stick around. We're going to be talking about China at the end of the program too, and I'm sure you've had a lot to add in that. Thanks.
I'll do my best. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. It looks like, in terms of, there are a couple of issues which really hot issues worldwide nowadays. That's of course, the climate change, sustainability, but also the vaccines. And it looks to me that, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, the vaccines are the soft or the diplomatic currency nowadays. So it's really interesting to see how things develop. And Stephen, as you said, to your point, yes, Japan really has a very important role to balance the power and the influence of China. So it's going to be interesting to watch, and hopefully we will stay safe, all of us, here as Japan is doing what it can to keep the region safe and quiet. Timothy, sorry for... Oh, we've got, David. Good morning.
Hi, guys.
What are your thoughts today?
So, thank you as always. Conversation's always super interesting. One comment and one question. My comment is I'm fascinated by people who thought that the vaccine was going to be anything. Feels like it's going really slow because they're working everything out in the background. It feels like they're never going to start, and then when they start, it moves really quickly. I don't understand why anyone thought it was ever going to work any other way than that, because that's how Japan works. That's sort of a comment. My question is, Timothy, what are your thoughts around Japan's approach to vaccine passports and the way that it'll open up? There's obviously been a lot of angst with the international student community, some of the business stuff, and then eventually moving into more general tourism. What are your thoughts around timing and what may or may not hold that up or speed it up?
Yeah, boy, you put your finger on a hot one there. I think the answer to the second question is contained in the comment in the first, it wasn't a question, but your first comment, which is, why did anybody think it would, roll out any other way? This is Japan, this is how it happens. And it is, gosh, you just slap your head sometimes. It is a great opportunity on the vaccine passports for Japan to actually leapfrog like they did in Somalia or Kenya, where they didn't even go from, telephone lines and telephone poles. They just leapfrogged from, banging on drums to having cell phones. They completely skipped an entire generation. The opportunity is right there again for Japan to, my God, a paper vaccine passport. When we've just launched the digital agency, we've acknowledged the need for Japan to match what other countries in the region are doing digitally. I mean, we are so far behind in other areas, and to start off with a passport, paper-based passport, it just makes you just, palm to the forehead. But I think it's like you said, David. How could you have thought that it would have happened any other way? Things are slow here. It's guided to, completely covering the basics, and then adding on layers to make it nicer and easier and more stable later on. And I think that's probably what it is, that it'll be paper-based, and very quickly the technology will be rolled out where it's embedded, for example, in My Number or in some other way, so that it's easier to use. But the focus will be on, yes, it's not a national vaccine passport, because people who will be traveling internally will not be needing the vaccine passport, presumably. It's the ones that are going outside, the Japanese businessmen and the foreigners who live here on business, and then business people coming into Japan. And more and more gradually the tourists too, but that won't be until October, November, I think. But yeah, I feel your angst, and I just wish it was. I wish they grabbed the opportunity, but there are a lot of other things going on here that occupy people's attention. So maybe that's part of it too.
Yes, if I may add, well, it's still internal information, but Keidan Ren is pushing for the acceptance of the passport, the health passport, by the middle of July. It's probably not going to happen. Probably it will be postponed to the end of July or maybe August. But one is sure that by the end of the Olympics, or soon after they are over, they'll have to accept, or implement the passport, so that they can open the borders first to business travelers and residents. And so later, by the end of this year, or maybe the beginning of next year, to foreign visitors, traveling for tourism. So that's for the moment. And good morning, Rumiko. Are you there?
Good morning.
What
Yes,
are your
good
thoughts
morning,
today?
Maya.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Maya, and good morning, Timothy. Thanks for your great insight as usual. My question or comment is like, as being a Japanese and trying to be in a Japanese community, halfway through, like, I've got this like kind of feeling like, our kind of like nature of the ethnicity is kind of like relatively conservative. So like the people around me who is like authentic is rather like, being afraid of being a, guinea pigs and without getting any results, like clear result or confirmation of the vaccination effectiveness or, clear proof of known side effects and stuff like that. And, one of the person I've heard that who is like a relatively like, paranoid is like towards this like kind of like a, not paranoid, but like, kind of like, prejudice with these like side effects and all that.
Rumiko?
Yep.
Rumiko?
Yep.
Could you speak closer to the mic? It's
Okay.
your voice is a little bit modulated.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, thank you. That's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So one of the person who is like regularly like prejudiced with this kind of side effect is telling me like, why Japanese government gave Taiwanese like ANZ vaccination is because the ANZ vaccination is not suitable for the Japanese people's blood, especially for females. And actually, out of like 1.2 like million dozens of the vaccination of the Taiwanese, like around like 40 people are dead because of the the stuck of the blood and stuff. And like to the Japanese government, seeing that the vaccination of the supplies actually so like a waste, and they wanted to utilize in a political manner rather than trying to kill our national people who is relatively concerned about being a guinea pigs and all that thing. I don't know whether this is a kind of conspiracy or not, but what is your thoughts about all those like national people's like ethnicity, nature and stuff? And I want to hear from your like non-Japanese perspective. Thank you. My speaking is done.
That is really a loaded question. Let me just make a couple of observations and then open it up to other people because there's a rich dialogue that can be had here. My first observation is that this trend of conspiracy theorists to be more and more prevalent among Japanese is growing. And I see it as healthy and interesting and somewhat valid. To see that kind of different discourse, but it's not always helpful in a society like Japan, which moves on a consensus basis. That's my first observation. My second observation is that there have been people who have been going out unplugging the refrigerators for the storage of the vaccines. That's happened in a couple of places, not in enough numbers for it to reach great coverage in the national press, but enough to be something of a blip to be curious of. So that means that some people hold the view that this is not right. We shouldn't get these vaccines. They're untested. We're being guinea pigs for somebody else's experiment. Maybe they're okay for the Caucasians, but for Asians and particularly for Japanese, it's inappropriate. It hasn't been fully vetted, that sort of thing. But this resistance to what the government is telling us is beginning to reach something of a groundswell. We've seen it a little bit in a couple of policies pursued by the Abe administration, for example, on state security and IP protection, that sort of thing. But it is beginning to gain speed. So let me not dominate the conversation, but open the room on that.
I have a couple of comments in a sec, Maya, when you're ready.
Yes, please. Yes.
Sure.
So, comment number one is that there's certainly, you can certainly see the growth. So, in terms of statistics, when they did the Pfizer trial, about 5% of the people covered were of Asian ethnicity. Now, I don't have the breakdown of that, but that was the initial trial, and hence They did the small trial here in Japan with 140, 150 odd people for Pfizer. And I can see politically why they did that. And it is absolutely a fact that medication does impact different ethnic groups differently. That's a fact. Having said that, yeah, you can see the growth in various versions of sort of conspiracy / anti-vax here. But having said that, I'm Australian. There's a strong anti-vax community there, and it's much more aggressive than what it is here. Generally, the unplugging thing's a strange one, but generally people, it's more of a personal decision rather than needing to shove it down other people's throats. And the third thing, this is a more general comment globally, it seems like most countries have struggled to get vaccine inoculation percentages above about 65 or 70%. That seems to be, if you look at the curves, you can see most countries that are further along, the curve starts to flatten at about 50%, as in it slows down. So the people that really wanted it, a lot of them have started to get it, and then between 60 and 70% it slows right down. So if you look at the US statistics now, they're ticking up very, very slowly. So it'll be interesting to see. I sort of expect Japan to do sort of the same thing when we get to that.
Thank you. Other comments on this? Then we can continue with Navin. Good morning. Your thoughts?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, man. Thank you. I mean, it is quite complicated. Like, you know, like the whole vaccine. I think, you know, the whole point of it is like, the thing is, when you take the vaccine, you know, if it like prevents, you know, like it getting spread amongst other people, then that's something like, you know, people can actually force people to take it, or at least, you know, and encourage people in different ways. You know, like the vaccine passport and everything. Like now, like if you are fully vaccinated, you're allowed to travel in certain countries in the Europe or to certain countries in Europe and everything. I just feel like it's kind of weird because like Rumika-san said, like it just, you know, the vaccine just came out, and you know, like people are saying like, you know, it was in trial phase initially and everything, but I think it's still in trial phase because no one really knows what kind of effects, you know, people have had by taking the vaccines. You know, like and you know, you really don't know like.
I think we lost Navin, so I hope that he'll come back at some point and continue. But by that time,
he will eventually get to his point, though.
Right. Yes. Okay. Before we well, sorry.
Sorry.
Yes. Sorry. Okay. Timothy, could you please continue with the next topic, and then when Navin comes back, we can
great.
yes.
Sure. There's lots more to be said about the vaccines and about the acceptability and that sort of thing. But maybe after we go through all of the parts, because I don't want to lose Stephen. Finish this up. Okay. Welcome back. Can you quickly make what your point was, Navin?
Yeah.
We're moving on.
Okay. So my whole point is like, you know, it shouldn't, you know, like it shouldn't quickly be like what to say, regulated as if like the vaccines are like here, like, you know, they're here to cure your corona and everything else or something. It should be like monitored as if like it is a scientific experiment. You know, instead of like actually saying like, you know, like just because you got the vaccine, now you can travel the whole world or something. I don't think that's a logical thing to do.
Thank you very much for your input. So let's move on to the Olympics. Okay, July 23rd. That's when it starts. Today is the 4th. You know, it's 3 weeks we've got in front of us. If you are traveling inside Tokyo, especially downtown, you're beginning to notice some of the roads are being shut off. The Gaien Park area is completely closed off. It used to be a pretty popular thoroughfare, and you have to go around it now. That is causing a lot of congestion. And you begin to see more and more of that as the Olympics approaches. You're also seeing on TV every day in the newspaper the teams that are coming in. We're friendly with many of the embassies and the diplomats who are in town. And of course, all of the diplomats within any embassy, you're going to have somebody that's assigned as the point person for the Olympic teams that are coming in. I mean, this is a big deal. You're here in this country, and you should be, hosting them and greeting them. But as I understand it, most of the diplomats are refrained from actually going out, welcoming the teams, going to visit them and give them a briefing or something like that. So a lot of restrictions are already in place. The ticket holder issue is very, very hot right now. Are we going to have people participating as spectators? Are we going to refrain them? One of the things that we didn't talk about in the Tokyo Metropolitan elections is Tomin First's position on. So frequently people say, what's the difference between the political parties? It's just a personality cult, right? In a lot of instances it is. But with regard to the spectators at the Olympics, Tomin First policy is no spectators. So when you're out campaigning and you hope people vote with you because of your stance on a position, most of the people, more than 60% of the Tokyoites don't want spectators in the games. In fact, they don't even want the games. So Tomin First position is no spectators. The LDP and Komeito say something very soft, like we want to hold safe and secure Olympics, like duh. The Japanese Communist Party's position is cancel the Olympics, don't hold them. And then the CDP's position is let's just postpone it. So there is a distinction there, and people might vote just based on that. I think the stance on what we do with the Olympics is going to be a defining factor for a lot of candidates in the elections today. But getting back to the spectators, they've already decided as of maybe Friday that we are going to reduce yet again the number of spectators into the Olympics. So last week on this room, we talked about, 10,000 is the maximum for any event, or 50% of the venue, whichever is less. So the number of people who are ticket holders, so here's where the controversy really comes to the fore. For the number of people who hold tickets, that means some of them are not going to be able to go in even though they have a ticket because of these restrictions. So they've run a lottery yet again, and they've reduced it to about 35% now of the total that were issued. That lottery, once again, will be released on in 2 days, on the 6th of this month. There's a team of several influential groups that are kind of managing and running the Olympics that will get together and decide what to do about that. It is likely to be just a preliminary report because it's just amazing. 670 cases were reported in Tokyo on Thursday. Friday was 660 cases, and it was in the 700s yesterday. So the number, it's particularly the Delta variant that is beginning to show its face. The numbers are rising, not in a good way. I mean, the pace is pretty remarkable. So it looks like we are in the middle of a fourth wave of COVID infections, particularly in Tokyo. So this impacts on the spectators, on the Olympics, on the opening ceremony, and it does look like we're going to have a bit of a shutdown, move into the fourth stage, another state of emergency just as the Olympics are beginning to start. This is a kind of a perfect storm, and it's so the government is concerned about that. They are going to limit the number of spectators, but it could be that they move into no spectators. So that's a big deal. And I think if you've been watching it carefully, there's been a lot of effort put before the Tokyo Metropolitan elections for these numbers. Keep these numbers down. Try and have people not drinking as much or shouting or waving or getting out into Shibuya, and it hasn't quite worked. The voice of the government has, when they said you can drink now until maybe 8 o'clock, but then you have to be thrown out. And so they did that. I think that people appreciated it and ran it to the hilt, but I think the numbers are just it's hard to stem them. So the opening ceremony will be on the 23rd. And just to remind everybody, there are 2 days of vacations, national holidays, just as the Olympics is starting. So Thursday and Friday will be national holidays. For planning purposes, I'm sure you will hear more about this as at work and in your own social circles as the days approach. They've extended the opening ceremony where the teams march in. They've got to be socially distanced. It's just funny when you think about it. Socially distanced in an event. They're going to all be competing in any event. There might be spectators. There might not be spectators, but there's not going to be any alcohol. And please don't shout and scream when your team walks in. It's just eerie how you kind of vision how that might look. And so they've extended the time that it's going to take to run through the opening ceremony. So probably in any event, they will extend the train lines running on that day, but they probably won't be filled with so many spectators, depending on what rolls out. And finally, on this issue, the self-defense forces have been mobilized to participate in the facilitation or management of the Olympics as this rolls out. That's kind of interesting and remarkable in that you're having the self-defense forces involved in this kind of an event. So you'll be seeing self-defense forces in uniform, either guiding traffic or in events. And the kind of funny thing about this, it's raised a little bit of once again the shackles of the foreigners, because of course Japan hates foreigners, and that meme gets repeated over and over again. But this treatment of foreign journalists and how they're coming into Japan and they'll be monitored, and we don't want them traipsing all around and reporting on the good parts and the bad parts of Tokyo and the homeless and just things like that. But in fact, it's just another one of those things that it's like shooting yourself in the foot. There are so many journalists here who already live here. They represent the CBS, NBC, all of these print media publications. They have representatives here. They don't have to be registered to take care of where they're going and what they're not supposed to be doing. It's the foreigners who come in. So there will be a lot of media coming in, more than 2,000 coming in from China. So I think probably that's part of it. But journalists coming in do need to be registered and have their iPhone monitored with where they're going. And you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of policing on that, people being ushered out of the country and people being really upset about that. So that's a little bit of a red flag to keep your eye on. It's likely to be a flashpoint, but I think given the circumstances, it's probably reasonable, and it's probably other ways to get the same thing done, both on the journalist side and on the government side, in protecting the government from all of these foreigners coming in distributing virus all over the nation. Anyway, that's it for the Olympics. I'd like to open the room for other comments and input.
Yes, obviously this is not a matter of us, the Japanese, versus the foreigners. It's just protecting the people who are already in the country from the people who possibly, might be just coming with new variants of the virus. Stephen?
Yeah, and it's the athletes are well protected, the teams are well protected, but it is true the journalists are the ones that are kind of the loose cannons here. They're the they're kind of free agents, so you really don't know.
Stephen.
Dr. Nagy?
I just got to jump in there with Timothy. I think I agree. I think there's a huge amount of fear mongering about the potential for some kind of super spreader event. And, there's prominent doctors that, are speaking very publicly using empirical information like Dr. Takai Oki. And, he demonstrates quite clearly the chance from a super spreader event emerging from the athletes is so low that it shouldn't actually be of concern for Japan and for the media. But the media has been selling a story that this is a super spreader event. And I think, as Timothy mentioned, over the past week, we've seen the numbers come up. That's the behavior of ordinary Tanakas and Suzukis. It's not the behavior of these elite athletes that are being tested before they come into Japan, when they arrive in Japan, and they'll be tested daily, and they're required to stay within a bubble. On the reporter side, those reporters that are coming in my understanding, that they're supposed to be following pretty much the same regulations as the athletes to ensure that there's not a spread of viruses. And I think that this makes sense. I think it probably needs to be articulated much better. At times, the Japanese government is not a very good communicator about these things, but they should be. They should have the same restrictions as the athletes in terms of movement, in terms of knowing where they are, and ensuring that, again, if they do have some kind of, if they are carriers, that we can deal with it quickly. So I think this is a communication issue. We also have this overhyping of the super spreader event issue. And I do think that it's important for us to put these things into perspective rather than, turn off our gray matter and be fear mongers in terms of thinking about the potential of a super spreader event.
Absolutely. So they one of the points that is not frequently mentioned is that if there's a fellow in NHK who is reporting in New York and he comes to Tokyo for the Olympics, he's under the same requirements as the other foreign journalists. So it's not really a anti-foreigner thing, but it's true. The journalists are the ones that they're going to be out drinking and carousing, and they're looking for an interesting story, and they're really the loose cannons. I don't mean that in a bad way, but yes, the journalists are the ones that produce the really remarkable stories and the eye-catching events and the wonderful things about what the Olympics does and how it works. But yeah, it is. I mean, it's once again the Japanese government is not really very good on the PR front.
Absolutely, Tim.
Yes, and Fabienne, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming up on stage. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Maya and Timothy. It's very interesting to listen to you talking. I had a question. Does the Japanese government plan some kind of automatic trigger of action? Let's say caseload is above 800 per day or rolling per week or something. And do they have some automatic plan that has to happen in case of like some specific numbers?
I'm sure they do. It hasn't been published as far as I know, but internally, I'm sure they have their guidelines that once it reaches a certain point, then the sky is falling, and let's all go berserk and shut things down, and call out the SDF, that sort of thing. But yeah, those protocols I'm sure are in place.
But they haven't announced anything, so they didn't take some kind of engagement saying. Some other country did that, right? Some other countries said, if we reach this critical mass, then we're gonna do X to the Y, whatever.
No, they haven't published anything, and I think the reason is because they just want to be flexible. So we're in a great state of flux right now. It's the same thing with the lottery for tickets and the number of people who will go to the events. It's just they really don't say. They're waiting for some sort of indicia to make the right kind of decision so that they're not criticized. So the main guiding force here is we don't want to be criticized. We want the Olympics to go successfully so that when we close down the house, the people who are making those decisions are reelected.
I see. Okay, thank you about that. I just feel that creates, the flexibility, the flux, the uncertainty about everything. I just think it doesn't really help the business, or doesn't help like day-to-day things to manage with this kind of situation.
Yeah, that too, but also it allows. So in this country in particular, sometimes just the governor or the prime minister or even Mr. Kono saying something carries enough weight. You don't have to have the regulation. You don't have to have those triggers. You say something or you inflect something in a public policy speech or in a press release, and people fall in line very quickly. So I think that's part of it too.
I see. Thank you very much.
Mayuko, hello.
Hi.
Very nice to have you again here.
Yeah,
Welcome back.
Thanks. I did miss you a lot last week. You do
Okay,
it.
great.
I would.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, and Yoko. Hello.
Hi, hello. My name is Yoko, and I'm speaking from Tokyo. I am an interpreter for media, and I was supposed to attend the Olympic Games as an interpreter, but I was wondering, because of the the vaccination rollout is coming really late, but the Tokyo government everything was available, so I eventually booked it. But I will participate in the event eventually. But I'm still wondering. So because now, if you talked about it, and it seems like there is no checking in place for the journalists coming from foreign countries. So I would like to know how the process is. Thank you very much.
What did you mean? There's no checking for the journalists? I didn't understand that.
Because you said that all the athletes are checked, but it seems like the foreign press coming into Tokyo, they don't. They can travel freely, or I don't know how it goes. So that's what I would like to know.
Okay, so normally people coming into the country, business travelers, tourists, and that sort of thing, are completely restricted. There's a limit on how many people can come into the country any day. But during the Olympics, there's going to be a further restriction. But you can come in if you are a journalist assigned to covering the Olympics. So they're letting the Olympic athletes in, their trainers, their entourage, probably some of their family, and journalists. And when they do that, they, I guess they sign an agreement, or they're under certain restrictions that you need to stay within this bubble, as Stephen described it. You're supposed to only go to these places. You're not supposed to be, involved in these activities, and you must register your whereabouts on the phone, and then check in from time to time. So you don't have to go into a 2-week hibernation, as you kind of have to do at this point. It's a different setup. You're coming in for the Olympics. So in exchange for that, there are certain requirements that you have to follow. So for the athletes, yes, they're being tested all the time. They're sleeping, in the villages and preparing for their events. And then after their events, they're free agents. They're going to be relieved. They're not going to be training anymore. They're going to be excited as hell. They're going to look at that bag of goodies that have been distributed to all of the athletes and scratching their heads and wondering, what do we do with these little packages? But it'll be an active time, and it will be very highly policed, as I understand it, and people will be thrown out of the country and ushered out if there's any violations of the regulations that they've imposed.
Thank you, but I'm wondering how the authority can tell that a foreign press is the resident of Japan or coming from the foreign country, how they can tell?
Oh, I think it's it's all going to be registered. All of the people who will be participating. So the foreigners might even have access to the games, not as spectators, but as functionaries of the Olympics. So in order to gain that access, you have to relinquish certain things, which is, for example, your phone and your access, and they'll have all of that information on file. And yes, who knows? I mean, I guess they're going to be using AI in order to manage it, but yeah, they will know. That I think that's not the hard issue.
Thank you. But I also I'm wondering how the foreign press feel about that kind of treatment.
Oh, they don't like it at all. They've already put up a coalition to defend against it.
Really?
Late last week
Right.
to complain against the government, and then the government responded pretty conclusively. So if you want to come in, then you follow our rules, and if you don't
Yeah.
want to come in, and so they were a little bit more explicit about it.
Right. I would like to see it. Can I see? How can I see the information?
I don't know if you Google it. I don't have it right here, but I remember reading it like on Thursday. So there was a bit of a controversy flared up. They try and keep it down because they don't want it to be real public knowledge that that people are being kind of treated this way, and that Japan is getting a bit of a black eye as a result of it. But it's out there. I think if you just Google it. Mind, I'd like to move on to Mr. Suga's situation. Is that okay, Maya? And you're flashing me, yes?
Yes.
Thank you. So it's really, really interesting. I'm glad we have this room only once a week because things happen so quickly and so dynamically, and any change or any kind of flash of things that happen, it has a spillover effect to other things too. So currently, Mr. Suga is in a bit of a pickle. He's got two factions that are forming under him. So he became prime minister as a result of his relationship with Mr. Nikai, who is the Secretary General of the LDP. No matter how much you like or dislike him, you can't dislodge somebody in that position until there's an election. So he's there. He's been there for Mr. Abe throughout Mr. Abe's term, and he's been there as a consequence of Mr. Suga becoming prime minister. And he is the one that is in charge of determining the individuals within the LDP who are going to run in specific election districts. Okay, so he's the kind of kingpin of defining or selecting what potential candidate from the LDP will run in a specific election district. And that is chafing for the following reasons. So let's say that there is an election for prime minister, ignoring everything else that is going on. The LDP, since it is the biggest party in the Diet, gets to select who their candidate is, and because if they have, the largest number of votes, their candidate becomes prime minister. So within the LDP, there are several factions, powerful factions, and the LDP is consists of the various factions. The Hosoda faction, which is the faction that Mr. Abe comes from, has 96 members. Number 2 is Mr. Aso, who has 53 members, and Mr. Nikai, who has 47 members. So typically in determining where we go with this, Mr. Abe and Mr. Aso will join forces. So the Hosoda faction, 96 members, and the Aso faction, 53 members within the LDP will carry that vote. Mr. Nikai, who only has 47 members, will want his candidate to become prime minister. And apparently, or we can guess that his candidate for prime minister would be Mr. Suga, because he pushed Mr. Suga into the prime minister's position in the first place. Mr. Suga, on the other hand, is reliant on Mr. Aso and Mr. Abe to kind of keep things moving in an even keel. So he's in a really difficult position. Must he honor his pledge to Mr. Nikai, who put him there in the first place, or should he go with the real power base to determine what his future is going to be, his destiny is going to be as prime minister? So we go on the assumption that Mr. Suga wants to remain as prime minister. That's kind of taken as a given, but it's there are other things that could happen too. So that's it in a vacuum. Taking away that vacuum and putting everything else into it, if the LDP does not do very well in the next election, and that is blamed on Mr. Suga, he could either resign or just be told, although you might run, there are other people that are going to get my vote or somebody else's vote. So this battle between Mr. Nikai, who is also in the LDP, and Mr. Abe and Mr. Aso is beginning to build. And you can tell that it's building in small, subtle ways. So there was a coalition of LDP members for the encouragement of semiconductor policy within the Japanese government. That was created by Mr. Aso, Mr. Abe, and Mr. Amari. And at the same time, Mr. Nikai came up with a coalition of Diet members to promote peace in the Indo-Pacific. And if you join this coalition, then you're kind of my guy. It's not like you're dedicating yourself to my faction, but you're just interested in this issue. And this is where the divide comes of even people who are on the same factions, they begin to drift. And it begins to tell you that where alliances are being had. So this fight of just on this coalition membership is a big it's a big signal for what is coming on in the near term. And also you have the municipal elections that are happening today, and how the coalition between the Jiminto, the LDP, and Komeito work to determine the 127 seats today, and how that will impact on what is done on the national elections. So we've talked about this for months now. The rollout is the Tokyo municipal elections, the Tokyo Olympics, then potentially closing down the lower house, a speech to the nation by Mr. Suga, the launch of a new budget for semiconductors, for COVID, for bringing Japan out of the economic doldrums, and then the election for prime minister. So that is the pattern that we've got coming at us. There's another thing that's kind of going on in the background, which is the redistribution of parliamentarian seats. So the Supreme Court has already announced 2 years ago that there are certain election districts that are in a state of unconstitutionality. That means that if put to a constitutional challenge, the elections that they have run are unconstitutional. But they didn't say that. They just said it's in a state of unconstitutionality. So it's kind of a weasel word for saying we acknowledge that it's unconstitutional, but I guess it's okay because we can't roll back the clock. So there are 10 districts that need to be reallocated. And this is interesting from a demographic perspective and also from just an economic perspective, that Japan is sucking in, and we've seen this for 30 or 40 years, Japan is sucking in the major municipal centers the population, and then the rural areas are being depopulated. And what happens there is that if you're a member of a political group that has received your votes in a rural group, over the last 10 years, the numbers that support you getting elected is falling lower and lower. Whereas when you're a parliamentarian from a municipal area, you have to work harder because there are more votes and each vote carries less weight. So they're going to go through a redistribution here where 10 seats will go to Tokyo, which actually Tokyo proper, 2 in Kanagawa, 1 in Chiba, 1 in Saitama, and 1 in Aichi, which is considered the megalopolis of Tokyo. It's not Tokyo proper, the 23 wards, but it's the megalopolis. So that would be 10 seats, and then the areas that would lose seats are those that we already know that are just extremely rural, where the people are fleeing after they go to college or maybe high school, and they come to Tokyo to get a job and start their lives. That would be Miyagi, Fukushima, Niigata, Shiga, Wakayama, Okayama, Hiroshima. Hiroshima is a bit of an outlier. Yamaguchi, Ehime, and Nagasaki. So you hear these names, and the picture that's drawn up in your mind are just trees and nature and that sort of thing. Whereas Tokyo, Osaka, Kanagawa are the major metropolitan centers. That redistribution will not affect the election that's coming up in the fall for the lower house, but it is on the boards, and it is carrying a little bit of weight of how people like Nikai are going to increase their membership. Nikai has got 47, also has 53. He's not that far away. Getting another couple of members for Nikai and eclipsing Mr. Aso, for example, or maybe Aso diminishing by losing a couple of seats in the next election is a very big deal. And the person that decides who is going to run in those election districts. So, for example, if Mr. Aso has a candidate, his member of his faction is already a member, and he will run in the election to keep his seat. Mr. Nikai doesn't have much of a voice in that. But when the seat is open or vacant, or when it's a new seat, one of 10 new seats, then Mr. Nikai definitely has a voice in who's going to be the candidate there. And once I select you to be the candidate and not somebody else, you're going to be, pretty much indebted to me as the person who allowed that. So that's the tension that's going on there. Right now, Aso and Abe are fighting hard to unseat Mr. Nikai in the next election so that Mr. Amari becomes the Secretary General. I'm sorry if this is a little esoteric, but it is critically important, because this fight within the LDP, it's like, the elephants fighting and everybody else gets crushed. It kind of dictates how the whole thing will roll out. So that's the reason why I spend so much time talking about it. So let me just leave it like that. There are other things that are going on, but that's pretty much the top line. And if there are issues or comments, maybe we can get into some of the finer details. But I appreciate this. This is kind of thick and not so interesting to everybody. But let me just end it at that and open the room for comments or questions. And then we'll go into China afterwards and wrap it up. Go ahead.
Maybe I'll jump in, Timothy. Really great synopsis. I agree with most of your analysis. I just want to actually give you some flags to look at this from a macro level. And if we look at Japan and some of its pronouncements vis-a-vis China and Taiwan over the past 4 months, it really shows how much they're pushing back against the Nikai faction within the LDP. Let's look to the Quad Leaders Summit. They have an explicit mention about China. We look at the U.S.-Japan summit with Prime Minister Suga and President Biden. They talked about Taiwan explicitly and focusing on peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. The Japan-EU meeting, Japan-Germany meeting, Japan-Canada meeting, and of course the G7 all included very strong statements about China, about Taiwan, about Hong Kong, about the Uyghur issue. And this is a real, I guess, the most overt demonstration that Nikai's position within the LDP is fraught with many challenges, and that the LDP leaders or elders, and here I'm thinking about former Prime Minister Abe, Amari, Aso, they want Mr. Nikai out as soon as possible. And I think that these international foreign policy statements are really the strongest and most explicit demonstration that Nikkai's position within the party is really on the wane. Yeah, more again a different party choosing a different path vis-a-vis China, but also working with other like-minded countries like the United States, Australia, India, and others on how to reconfigure Japan's trading portfolio and engagement with China so that it's much more representative of the challenges that Japan is facing.
Right. So one of the things that you left out, if people aren't really that clued in, is that Mr. Nikai is famous for being close to China and having a good, warm relationship with the Chinese, and also Ms. Koike is somewhat similar to that. So there's a bit of joining of forces there. But yes, any pimple on his face that you can point to is something to talk about with the other faction, Amari Aso Abe, and the fact that he, and at certain times in the past, this was a great feature to have. I mean, Komeito brags about their affinity with China. So yeah, sometimes it's for you and sometimes it's against you.
And it's increasingly difficult to maintain that position. I think it was easier when we didn't have all these allegations against about the Uyghur re-education camps or the quashing of freedom of press and the one country, two systems in Hong Kong. And, most recently with Xi Jinping's July 1st speech talking about crashing the skulls of foreigners against a wall of steel. I mean, it's really hard to maintain these positions that's favoring a more favorable relationship with China when China's fundamentally changed. And I remember Kono Taro said this when Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, said, "You're nothing like your father." And Kono Taro, when he was foreign minister, he said back to Wang Yi, he said, "Well, you're not the China my father used to know." And I think that's really, really important for us to know. We've moved into a position where China is a fundamental different state under Xi Jinping.
Yeah, I want to move closely or quickly into the China discussion because that is so important. But it does have an implication to the Suga situation as well. And yeah, it's just the other thing. Sorry, Ren, just to finish off my comment. The other thing is that this the research and the intel on the Wuhan virus and where that came from and how that was started and the implications for Dr. Fauci and that sort of thing. It's beginning to explode forth, and yes, China could become even blamed more and be more of a pariah in the international arena as this kind of rolls out. So something to keep a careful eye on. Hi, Ren. Sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you. A good bridge from your Suga topic to the China topic. My question is, Mr. Kishi, the Minister of the Defense Force, after Xi Jinping's speech, he mentioned that we now need to watch even more closely to the safety of Taiwan. I have been curious about his real, should I say, influence or power within Jiminto or within Japanese politics, because I personally agree with what he's saying. I'm just not sure how powerful he is with regard to China, especially in this regard.
Anyone?
And we know he's a brother. He's a real brother of. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think the way to define that is to figure out, what his brother's positions are, and we pretty much know what his brother's positions are. So he's probably, because he wasn't that prominent of a politician before he received this portfolio, but he's at that age. He's received enough re-elections to be a minister, And since his brother stepped down, it was time for him to step up and keep tabs on that. Maybe that's the way Mr. Abe continues to keep his influence on the defense side. But we all know Mr. Abe determined to revise the constitution to enhance Japan's shouldering of the defense capabilities and the amount of revenue that it receives, and its kind of reliance on the United States for defending itself. So I think that's the best indication of where his power base is and how the Japanese will move forward. But I'm in the Diet on a weekly basis, meeting with members of the parliament, the LDP, and talking about business issues and political issues as well. And the two issues that drive LDP politics now are semiconductors and regional security. So there's an awful lot of intention going there. And if you look at the two coalitions that were set up, one by the Abe faction and one by the Nikai faction, the Abe Aso Amari faction created something about preservation or promotion of strategy for semiconductors, and then the Nikai faction came up with Indo-Pacific peace and security. So that tells you, I mean, this is representative of what the direction and the force of energy going forward are likely to be. So it is something to keep a careful eye.
Thanks.
Mayuko, I think that we came up to the subject of China.
Okay.
Yes, we've kind of drifted into
Yes.
to China as a segue. And let me just tee it off for you so that you can give us your on-the-ground input. So the 100-year celebration in Beijing was remarkable for a lot of reasons that Stephen pointed out, but the suggestion of where they're going and what their intentions are is really palatable, and it's something that people need to take due note of. So I think you'll begin to see shifts. We did see a shift maybe 3 weeks ago where the Chinese were backing off and more going to the softer side and enhancing their PR. They do have a great a propaganda machine. There are a lot of great, wonderful things to be said about China, about their culture, about their history. And yes, it is true that they have been taken advantage of. The Opium Wars and what happened during World War II, and there are a lot of complaints and criticisms that can be lodged. But time doesn't stand still, and like you were saying, the China that Konotaro's father dealt with is different from the China that Konotaro himself has to deal with. His irreversible rise is what he said of China and the wall of steel. These are really threatening remarks. So the rivalry between China and the United States is becoming more and more apparent with the Biden administration, getting a little bit more comfortable with, after being 6 months into it, and the incredible things that are going on to Hong Kong or going on with Hong Kong are a signal of things to come. So with that, Mayuko, how are things going with Apple Daily, which is the former publication
Right.
at this
So
point?
yes, thank you, Timothy. I have one question for everyone here and one comment, I guess, on more of a personal note. I feel we tend to get caught up in each incident, but I think it's important to focus on the big picture. So my question is, what do you think the closure of Apple Daily means for Hong Kong in terms of freedom of press? Did they target Apple Daily specifically alone, or do you think they're going to go after other medias like Hong Kong Free Press or RTHK? What's next in terms of critical journalism here in Hong Kong? I think the stakes are definitely higher to be a journalist here in Hong Kong. So that's my question for everyone here. And more on a personal note, my husband and I, we are Muslims, and think for us it all depends on how freely we can practice our faith here. So yeah, that would be my question and comment.
May I speak, Maya?
Yes, Ren.
Thank you.
Please.
Hi, hello, Mayuko. Hello again.
Hello, Ren.
Hi. Before I answer or speak about my mind, can I actually ask you a question about your question? Meaning,
Sure.
How have you seen the foreign journalists or media are treated in Hong Kong? Is there freedom to getting smaller and smaller? That would be another indication as well, right?
Mm-hmm. So very interesting you ask, because my husband is a journalist here. One change I guess I can talk about is so we renew our visa every 2 years or so here in Hong Kong, and previously there was no problem. You know, whenever we go and renew our visa, they just give it to you over the counter right away, you know, on the spot. But this time, it took they when we went to apply for a visa, they said, okay, we will give you a call, and they didn't say when. So we were quite anxious because we didn't know whether they renew our visa and stuff. So, but I mean, we did get our visa, but after like 2 weeks maybe. So that was our personal experience. Other than that, I think it depends on how senior you are, how visible you are in terms of journalism. So my husband is not. He's not a reporter. He's not a text person. So maybe that has something to do with it.
So, thank you. So, for example, are regular Hong Kong people still able to watch, let's say, BBC or NHK without any interruptions?
I actually we don't have TV here.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Okay.
But I think they can. I think they can still.
Yeah,
I'm able to use Clubhouse, for example, so far. And I think this is, I hope I will be able to use Clubhouse even in the future, but I honestly don't know.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question and keep asking you questions instead. But I was thinking, how these media's access from average Hong Kong people and also foreign media's activities in Hong Kong will be a better indication of how they want to control Hong Kong, right, than because after Apple News, I don't think there's any major one left in Hong Kong. Am I right, or are they?
The Hong Kong Free Press is there. RTHK they did a documentary on the Yunnan incident 2 years ago, and I think they won some awards as well on that. So I think there's some other ones as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So maybe, Ren, I'll just add a bit of value to the discussion. So I think that there's a division in Chinese societies, but in Hong Kong in particular, between the English language press and the Chinese language press. And what we've seen over the past maybe 30 years is that an organization associated with the Chinese government called the United Front has basically bought up most of the Chinese language presses and made them into pro-China papers. So the Ming Pao is a good example, but others. So the kind of articles they write are relatively less critical, and they don't touch upon the pressure points of the central government. So I think that since the national security law, of course, the press has become much more sensitive to what they write and how they write. But that process has been happening for 30 or 40 years. So, the coverage, the critical coverage of what's happening in China has really diluted. Second, the national security law, and of course, just general the use of fear. And the expression is that a lot of my mainland Chinese friends say is that our parents get called for tea at the police station, and the police don't tell the parents why they've been called to the police station. And then, of course, the parents call their children in Hong Kong and say, "What the hell are you doing?" So fear is also a tool to suppress how people are talking and what they're reading in the Hong Kong context. So I think we need to look at the Chinese side and less so the English side. The South China Morning Post is still there, but it's fundamentally changed. It was bought up by Jack Ma and Alibaba, and its tone has become much less critical. As Mayuko mentioned, the Hong Kong Free Press is an online publication in English. Great reporting, but I don't think it reaches out to the ordinary Cantonese-speaking citizens because their English language skills aren't that good.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. That was great. So yeah, for me, I feel that it's after freedom of press of speech, it's education and then perhaps religious freedom. So Stephen, do you have any insights on the education front in Hong Kong?
So when I worked there, I used to work at the Chinese University of Hong Kong in their Japanese Studies department, and that was from 2008 to 2014. And the courses that I taught were security, international relations, and politics. And there was a certain kind of student that took those courses. Most of the students avoided politics and international relations because they understood implicitly that it was somewhat sensitive, and that they studied more, less sensitive topics. And that seems to be the general trend. And now, when I speak to my colleagues now, really, it's very difficult to teach, for example, courses on social movements, courses on civil society, courses on democracy, in a way that's critical of China. And that's a fundamental change since the national security law. But that has been happening for at least 10 years, maybe longer. And I think generally what's going to happen, and Mayuko, what you'll be able to experience this, is I think the Chinese government's approach is that they want to keep the fishbowl of Hong Kong, but they want to change the fish. And the fish are anybody that is thinking about, democracy,
Absolutely.
or building civil society, or having accountability and transparency of government, and of course, a judicial branch which is independent of politics. And at this stage, the fish are slowly being replaced with the kind of fish that I think Beijing favors.
Right. And on religious freedom, what do you? Because obviously we know what's happened to Tibetans and Uyghurs, and I guess as Muslims we are, we're closely watching that. What do you think would happen to Hong Kong in terms of religious freedom? Do you think people will be able to practice their faith freely?
That's a really good question, because as you know, there's not just Muslims there. There's many Christians. There's Hindus. There's Sikhs. There's a lot of diversity in Hong Kong in terms of religious background. And at this stage, I don't think we see a quashing of religious rights, and I don't think we've seen any activism by the various religious groups within Hong Kong. But that being said, I think that, and we haven't seen it, that there's a possibility for some of the religious groups being painted with the so-called three evils: separatism, extremism, and religious extremism. And when that happens, then I sense that the religious freedoms of not just Muslims but others may be put under duress. And this is a challenge because, as you know, the religious leaders in Hong Kong, and I'm not so sure about the Muslim ones, except when I was there, the Muslims were very proactive in providing for the poor in Hong Kong. But the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church in Hong Kong has been very proactive about supporting the one country, two systems. And I think that this will be a growingly difficult fine line to walk if Beijing continues to put pressure on Hong Kong, and I do think that Beijing is going to continue to put pressure on Hong Kong.
Thank you. I think, like you said, Stephen, one thing I love about Hong Kong is that religious and ethnic diversity. So I really hope that we will be able to have that in the future as well.
A quick question to Mayuko and Stephen. Was Falun Gong ever being allowed in Hong Kong? Do you know?
Actually, they used to be. Thanks, Ren. If you stood in front of the Star Ferry harbor or ports, you'd always see the Falun Gong protesters there, very, very openly talking about the communist government and what they've done in terms of suppression of Falun Gong. Whether they're still there, I think Mayuko will have better insight.
I actually haven't. I don't really go out of my island much, but maybe since the pandemic and since the national security law, you're not really supposed to gather, in groups. So I feel like I haven't really seen them lately, but I'm not sure. If I see them, I will report back to you, Ren, next week maybe.
I mean, if they are still allowed to practice, and that would be an interesting fact, because I would be really surprised, right, based on the current situation in Hong Kong.
I think practicing and protesting is different. They were infamous for being very, very open about being critical against Xi Jinping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and all the Chinese political figures. And they talked about the forced organ transplant of Falun Gong members to ordinary Chinese citizens. Very, very open and critical. And I can't imagine that being permitted under the national security law.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this discussion. Are there any other questions or comments? Anybody who is in the listeners' hall, please let us know. Raise your hand if you have a comment. If you want to share your thoughts, talk with Timothy or Ren or Stephen, Nagy or Rumiku or Navin, Mayuko, and Hayato and David, you're welcome. Let us know.
Oh, hi, can I talk a minute?
Yes, please do.
Oh, okay. Hi, how are you? Good morning. Okay, so that China is a country where the 1% of the population controls 99% of the population through media control and military force, right? So for that, any kind of small fall in a clock in the media control, they're going to lose the country, or at least the current leaders will lose the country. So for that, they're going to have a very tight military, the media control all the time. That's my view. Right? And also, when the UK, they surrendered the Hong Kong to China in 1999, it's the Hong Kong sovereignty has been lost to China, 100%. So it's a matter of time. It's like a one country, two system was intended to be a temporary show, right? Within at the time, within the 50 years, it will become the part of China with nothing left as Hong Kong, right? So that was a plan in 1999. So we are half into the 50-year plan, right? So so for that, all this, the life and situation will be harder, right? And so the religious, the group will be, probably will go through the same experience like they are going through in the mainland China, right? As you watch it, so it's just coming. So it's kind of, if you don't want to go through that, it's better off to, try to leave as you can the early possible. That's my take. And also the Taiwan is also, it's a kind of discussion, and we United States government has had handover discussion on the control of Taiwan with China about 10, 20 years ago. And at the time, discussion was very, very similar, which is going to just keep it, something like that for 50 years, right? Then after 50 years, it will just become 100% China the way it is. And at the time, the condition, it only had one condition, which was the full military control of Taiwan. That was one condition for surrender. right? So that was like an agreement that we have had before that has been changed since then. But so for that, like once that the military control has been handed over to China or the United States, I think that's the one that will control the country. Just for information for Japan or Korea, it's a same situation. Like I remember, like Ren has mentioned a couple of weeks ago that Japan is a colony of the United States. It is, because Japan does not have its self-defense force has been going through the United States communication system. So U.S. is the one that's going to have the command of the self-defense force right now. And as well as all the intelligence, Japan doesn't have any intelligence, U.S. does, right? CIA has a 10 million active agent globally, right? Yeah, so for that, Japan has been dominated by U.S. intelligence and also the, U.S. military, the way that we see. We have 50 bases in Japan, right? Yeah, so for that, we like to be, we like to hope, that the democracy is going to change, the way that we think will be the ideal world. But in the ideal situation, whoever that's going to dominate the military power is going to be the one that's going to dominate that particular location. Yeah, so for that, and also last 20, 30 years, what the military leader has been very clear. The only enemy of the United States will be those who do not use the U.S. dollar as the key currency, a major currency, right? So at the time, we had, the Chinese, Russia, Iran, Iraq, and Libya. And look what happened to Libya, and look what happened to Iraq. Now Iran in the United States is going to have those kind of commerce territory, agreement based, so they won't go into the war. So now, and Russia only have a GDP that's the size of the Tokyo Metropolitan in Kanagawa in Saitama Prefecture. So it's too small to go into war. So China is the only one that the U.S. sees as a enemy right this time. So and I guess as long as the U.S. sees that it has a military dominance, then it will probably stay in the peace. But when the U.S. feels the military dominance is being threatened, then the U.S. is going to engage and go into war. And I think that maybe that happened this year. And that's, I think, the reason that those Biden start talking about the book Wuhan and all this virus. Because that's what same thing the United States did to go into Iraq. So I'm done talking. Thank you.
Maya, can I make, since Hayato mentioned my name, can I make a brief correction to what Hayato just said?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
A very quick one. Hayato-san, thank you for your comment, but I didn't say Japan was a colony of U.S. I was talking about some of my people, my friends, saying that Japan is a colony of the U.S.
Yeah, my apology. Yeah, you're correct.
No, it's okay. I just want to clarify. I'm the one who are trying to tell people that Japan should show more leadership and don't think you are the colony of the U.S. Thank you. I stand speaking, Maya. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, I can see you have unmuted your mic.
Oh, I could talk and talk and talk, but I agree with Ren. I think that Japan needs to continue to show increased leadership, and I think they did. They did under the former Prime Minister Abe, as President Trump was elected, and what we saw is Prime Minister Abe continued forward with the TPP negotiations. He negotiated what's called the Japan EU Economic Partnership. He also negotiated and pushed forward on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So we see that Japan led, and it's really quite a paradox. It led in terms of supporting multilateral initiatives. And this is my worry under the current Prime Minister, is that he's not leading in the same way that I think Prime Minister Abe did. Prime Minister Abe was a quite charismatic person. Just whether you liked his politics or not, he was very forward-thinking. He traveled extensively, and he was seen as a senior statesman globally. And the current Prime Minister, I think, has a more quiet approach to policy, and he has had some successes like the Quad Leader Summit and the G7. But still, it's a different personality, and it doesn't come off as forward-leading leader, and I think that's what Japan needs right now, and that's what the region needs right now. And it's an open question of how we're going to, what's going to happen if Prime Minister Suga is re-elected or we have a new Prime Minister. In both cases, I think that the lesson should be learned that the region needs a more independent Japan, and a Japan that has more voice at the international stage and in the region.
Thank you. I very much agree with you with your comments on this. Timothy, you unmuted your mic. What's your input? Sorry.
Well, no, I see we have Noto that came on stage, and I'd like to hear his comments. But the analysis provided by Hayato is just really, really excellent. And I'm so pleased with the comments from Ren and Stephen too. All of the information that's pouring in, the different perspectives. It's really great to be in this room with all of you guys and to decipher and determine how these things are going. But I don't have anything more more valuable to add to that. So I'd just like to continue this conversation. Noto-san, you have something to add?
Hello, Timothy, Maya. Thank you so much. I'm Noto Soneto. I'm originally from Indonesia, but currently based in the United Kingdom. This is my first time joining this room, so apologize in advance if I don't, if I give any unrelated question. But I'm curious to know your thoughts, everyone in this room, about Japan's engagement with Southeast Asia. What I see, for example, South Korea has been very aware of the importance of Southeast Asia in the future, especially in global politics and in global economy, right? We see President Moon even just announced a New Southern Policy Plus to upgrade the New Southern Policy that he released in 2017. I'm just curious to know, how about Japan? We know that Japan for the past years have presented the Indo-Pacific, the free and open Indo-Pacific to engage with Southeast Asia. But we know that ASEAN has its own Indo-Pacific outlook. So is there any talk or discussion within the Japanese leadership today on engaging more Southeast Asian countries? Has there been any thoughts about any new formulation from Japan about this, like South Korea has? Thank you so much.
I'm only aware anecdotally of different initiatives that are being made. Maybe Stephen, since this is part of your lifeblood, you have more insight. But for example, the Japanese relationship with the Philippines is kind of off again, on again, and the Philippines plays a pretty important role. Malaysia as well. There has been some initiatives with the Japanese and COVID. With Malaysia, and always, what's going on in other areas. South Korea, not so much, except in terms of reigniting the trade policies. But Stephen, you have anything better to add on that?
So I think when we look at Japan's engagement with Southeast Asia, we should look at it over the past 40 years. And I think today's current story is China, 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 BRI, BRI, BRI. But collectively, the amount of investment that has gone into the region, number one is Japan, number two is Japan, number three is Japan. And only until recently, we've seen China start to invest more in the region. Japan's done this through what we call overseas ODA, overseas direct assistance, or okane dake ageru.
Checkbook diplomacy.
Well, sometimes, right? They've done it through FDI, and you see the footprints all over Southeast Asia. Whether you go to Vietnam or Myanmar or Philippines, you'll see these bridges and roads being built that have been built by the Japanese. Second, Japan has been really, really proactive in recruiting Southeast Asian students to come to Japan and study. And I think that's really important. And a real contemporary example is the former Myanmar ambassador to the EU, or the UN, actually was a graduate from the International University of Japan. That's the ambassador that stood up with the three fingers and now is in exile. So Japan has been training government servants and diplomats throughout the region. Third, and this has happened over the past 15 years, is Japan has built what's called strategic partnerships throughout the region. And that means helping them with human capacity building, the provision of equipment such as secondhand Coast Guard vessels so that they can build their maritime awareness activities. They've helped with other capacity building exercises, as well as bringing in those countries, the majority either through the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or some of the countries like Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Singapore into the TPP-11 to enhance their trade portfolio and get them involved in the global trading system. So Japan has been extremely active. And, the last and the most recent pillar, of course, is through the COVAX program and Japan's unilateral vaccine provision programs. This is going to continue. Japan prioritizes the region. You've seen Prime Minister Suga visit Indonesia and Vietnam in his first visit abroad, and the former Prime Minister visited all the Southeast Asian countries at least twice through his 8 years as Prime Minister. So Southeast Asia plays a very central role in Japan's foreign policy and how it views the region moving forward.
Thank you for that input.
Hi, Maya. May I add some comments on that as well?
Yes, please do.
Hi, Nato. Nice to meet you. Used to be a permanent residency, having a permanent residency of Singapore, and used to travel business trip like Southeast Asia, being employee of like a Japanese company and doing the audit of the Southeast Asian companies of Japanese companies and all that. And what is happening, adding on to the Stephen's point, is that from my perception, it used to be from the governmental support to the commercial public, support is really started to rolled out to towards all those countries. For example, the secondhand thing, for example, the normal just private company of the Japanese bus company, secondhand bus is just gonna be donated to the Indonesian company so that that they can utilize in the public transportations and stuff. And that is one of the kind of examples. And when it comes to main systems and all that, we are getting the more visa from the Filipinos people to come into Japan to support the the older people in Japan and all those things. It's all based on the private sectors rather than the public sectors. And that's how much Stefan mentioned, the past 40 years and all that, based on the ODA money and all those things were invested in there. And now it's on the public rather than the public hand, onto the private sector's hand to develop, to to more into nation to nation relationship rather than governmental relationships, so that we can be dealing with things equally and all those things. So I think the Southeast Asian countries are getting developed more and more, and so that you guys have more power economically and can deal with different parts of the world like we do as the Japanese people, that as the same. That's my perception. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody. Yeah, thank you. I'm done speaking.
Maya, can I give a response to that?
Yes, please do.
Thank you, Timothy, Stephen, and Rumiko. So especially to Stephen, so are you suggesting that Japan is now confident with its engagement with Southeast Asian countries to increasing level of strategic partnership, as you said, to foreign direct investment that they have established for the past decades in Southeast Asia, and therefore not feeling cautious about what China and South Korea, for example, has been done in terms of diplomatic, political, and economical maneuver in Southeast Asia. So, do you think that Japan in the next few years will not develop any strategic and specific concept to engage with Southeast Asian countries?
Thanks, Noto. So I think that they've already placed Southeast Asia front and center in its free and open Indo-Pacific vision, which places ASEAN centrality as the most important aspect of how this region is going to continue to develop. And that's important because from Japan's perspective, they want to ensure that the Indo-Pacific continues to develop based on this idea of ASEAN being the center and how ASEAN solves problems through consensus-based decision-making rather than, a Midas right Machiavellian approach to problem solving. So that's really important. It's put it front and center. Second, and I think that if you look at some of the initiatives in Southeast Asia, whether it's the Mekong-Japan cooperation network or some of the infrastructure projects that are being built in Southeast Asia, and there's something called the East-West Corridor, which goes from Da Nang to Myanmar, or the North-South Corridor from Hanoi down to Saigon. And there's also a southern corridor that kind of goes around Vietnam and Cambodia. All of these are meant to strengthen Southeast Asia's what we call strategic autonomy, again, so that it becomes more integrated regionally. And if it's more integrated regionally, it can function more independently vis-a-vis China and other great powers. So Japan, it really has, I think, a broad vision. But that being said, it could always do more. It could always be more proactive on supporting some of the Southeast Asian countries or ASEAN institutions. I think that one way to do that is to start at home, is building more Southeast Asian country experts at home. And as you know, I'm sure you know that the priority place where most Japanese people go to study abroad is in Southeast Asia. It's the United States and the UK, right? So I think that is another step forward if Japan wants to demonstrate its commitment, is to build more Southeast Asian specialists so that they can more intelligently engage within the region. And I think that's not just a Japanese problem. That's a Canadian problem where I'm from, an American problem. If we want to put Southeast Asian countries front and center in our foreign policy, we must have much deeper expertise and networks. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Governor Nagy.
Thank you, Stephen. Ren, do you have anything to add to that? Yes, please.
If nobody has anything to add on that topic Noto has provided, I would like to get back to what Hayato-san just mentioned a few minutes ago, just one subject of what Hayato-san mentioned, if that's okay.
Yes,
sure,
please. Yes.
Yeah, Hayato-san, you mentioned 1% of the population is a Chinese Communist Party, and then 99% of the Chinese people are not. And the Xi Jinping speech, it was an hour and a half long, and that entire text in English is downloadable. And I was just reading that, and also. It's interesting that because when I make a comment about Chinese Communist Party's policy, I'm always very sensitive about, hey, I'm not talking about Chinese people. I have many Chinese friends. This is not against the Chinese culture. I love Chinese culture, actually. And this is about their policy, right? So I'm very careful about this. Then I read this line. I'm reading this line from Xi Jinping's speech. He says, any attempt to divide the party from the Chinese people or to set the people against the party is bound to fail. And he continued to say that the more than 95 million party members and the more than 1.4 billion Chinese people will never allow such a scenario to come to pass. And I find it interesting because it's as if he was telling me that I don't have to be sensitive. I can connect the Chinese Communist Party and the people of China directly. So that's an interesting observation, maybe. But the point I'm trying to make is there was an article about the number of population in China who think they are more of a city people, cosmopolitan people than farmers have doubled. And within those cosmopolitan, self-proclaimed cosmopolitan Chinese people, the number of people who are not happy with the Communist Party's policy is double than the number of people who are not happy with the party's policy in the farm, among the farmers. And so I find it very interesting, and I like to hear what other people say, but I find it very interesting that an important speech, even though it was an hour and a half long, Xi Jinping actually had to make this comment that we are Chinese people's voice, and you, the foreigners, do not think the Chinese people and the Communist Party are not the same. Does that show a weakness that he just revealed, or any other perspective or any other views on why he actually had to make this comment? Will be interesting to me. So just soliciting other people's opinion here. Thank you.
This is what I meant. Right? So Chinese military has 25 million power to deploy right now. 25 million military soldiers. Right? And China has about 2.5 billion population. That's the internal data from China. Yeah, so for that, military is 1% of the entire population. Right. When it comes to the wars and battles, anything else, well, this time, communists, all these things does not matter, right? It's a military against the people. So that's what I meant, the 1% against 99%. Today, China has 10 million soldiers. 5 million of them are deployed outside of Beijing just to protect their leadership in the government in the country. Everything else has been kind of spread apart, right? So, yeah, so that, and also getting back to the Ren's question, I think this kind of reveal, the weakness for the first time, because before Chinese leaders never admit that there was any difference between China, Chinese people, and Chinese leaders, right? So it's the first time they admit the history. So they kind of, I guess they're just addressing that there are so many talks, Chinese leaders, current leaders who are communist parties or more like a military do not represent the Chinese people, right? In particular, that's I guess there are a lot of press coming out of Hong Kong too, right? Yeah, so that's my take, right? Yeah, so and then just remember this: current Chinese leaders are not like these politicians or elected officials. Those are the sons of the guerrilla, right, who capture the country, right? So those mentalities and those people never changed, I'm telling you. Those guerrilla and, so same things in Vietnam too. So that's why, in my community and my work, we call those countries, the countries of guerrilla, because those mentalities never change, China, Vietnam, Cuba, right, Myanmar, look what happened, right? Yeah, sometimes. I'm done talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayato. Well, if there are any other comments, or if there are, please let us know, of course. But if there are any other comments, I think that slowly but gradually we need to proceed with wrapping up the room. So I'll just wait for a couple of seconds to see if anybody would like to join the discussion.
I think it's been really a great and insightful discussion on what's going on with China, and not only just China, but the China-Japan relationship and how that is developing. Stephen dropped out. I know he has other obligations. He's got some kids at home as well, so I appreciate him signing on. He always has great insight. Hayato, your analysis was so excellent. Thanks for sharing it with us. And this room just keeps getting better and better every week. To just wrap it up, the highlights that we talked about were the Tokyo Metropolitan elections that are going on today. Please watch the news tonight to see how it goes. It is predicted that the LDP will come in very strong. Probably Tomine first will lose their primacy, and as a consequence of that, there'll be questions about Ms. Koike as governor. We talked about the Olympics and the vaccines, a good conversation going on there. And finally, we ended up with Mr. Suga and his situation, how complicated that is, and what the prospects are for eventual rollout. That will become more and more important in about 3 weeks. So in the next 2 weeks of discussion, we'll be talking a lot about the Olympics a lot about spectators and the vaccine rollout, and a little bit less about what's going on with Mr. Suga, because it's not prime time for those cards to be revealed, but they will be in about 3 weeks, just as the Olympics starts to roll down. I so much appreciate everybody that came up on the stage today, and what a great audience too. Please continue to stay tuned, and Maya, off to you.
Thank you, Timothy.
Sorry.
Yes?
Can I as what Ren said, can I just make a quick comment? I
Yes,
was
Sure,
just trying to
please.
gather my
please
thoughts.
do. Yes.
I think what Xi Jinping said, his words are very much in line with their strategy. I think that what they do is they make their enemies allies. So if we look at religion or ethnic minorities, what they do with them in the mainland is that for Uyghurs or Tibetans, they find their friends within that group. And I think they do that to justify what they do. So they say, see, you know, these Uyghurs or Tibetans, they're also Communist Party members, and they're very happy with what we do with them. So I think what he said in the speech, whether it comes out of fear or insecurity, I don't know, but I think it's very much in line with their strategy. So in terms of Hong Kong, in terms of religious freedom, and because I'm Muslim, so I think the moment they put up pictures of CCP leaders inside a mosque or something, then I think that would be a real turning point for me personally.
Yeah, thank you, Mayuko-san. Just to echo your point, there's one single line that he said also that highlights your point. He actually said this. He said, I'm reading the text here, very short sentence. He says, the party was chosen by history and the people of China, right? Why do you have to stress that? That's a big question, right?
Right. I think we also need to, and I think I've heard someone else talk about this somewhere else on Clubhouse, but we tend to think CCP is this one monolith that everyone is in line with the leadership and everything. But there's a lot of power struggle that happens within the party. So it's not as simple as it seems on the surface. And perhaps we could talk about this some other time when we have more time. I find this a very interesting topic.
Right, thank you.
Can I give response to Wen? Hi, Wen. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Right. I've been doing some research on how authoritarian countries manage its leadership and endure its regime, right? And many countries, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. And one thing that I want to point out here is that one important component to endure the leadership of authoritarian regime is a legitimacy of the government or the legitimacy of the leadership, and it can be pursued through public support. So many people, many scholars thought that public support is only legitimate in democracies, but what I've been reading so far is that public support and the legitimacy coming from public is also very important in authoritarian states, and that's what President Xi Jinping has been doing so far in terms of extending the power, influence, and the trust of its people towards the Chinese Communist Party, right? Building the confidence from its people that the party is protecting you, that the nation is working for you, and you need to work for the government to support the China to defend to defend themselves against the Western allies and so on and so forth. So that's how China that I read so far can maintain its authoritarian legitimacy.
Yeah, that sounds like North Korea more and more than before China.
No, but some authoritarian rely on fear, on security threat. So that's what North Korea do. But China is now a little bit different, right? With economic prosperity, with the public confidence. I talked with my friend here in the UK. She's Chinese, and I talked to her like this: "Hey, have you been concerning about the regime, your Chinese, leadership, President Xi Jinping?" And what she said is interesting for me. She said, "No, Noto. I trust what government is doing. They are protecting me and my family. What me and my family needs to do is to get to be economically prosper, to be academically smarter, right?" That's what she said to me. And she said to me that that's high level politics. Let them do it. Let the party is working on it. And me, I'm doing my role. After that, I'm impressed and say, oh, that's how Chinese Communist Party has been very successful in influencing its people to trust towards the government. And that's important thing that needs to be noted by democracies worldwide, I guess.
Very interesting. I also, if I could just echo Noto real quick, Ren, I thought that one thing that you said was interesting. You said that when you speak about Chinese people and the politics, you try and use words carefully to separate Chinese politics and government from the Chinese people, right? Because you don't, obviously as a courtesy to those who maybe don't 100% support the government. But one of the things I thought was interesting you said was you use these words, but then Xi Jinping in his speech, he says, that he wants Chinese people to be associated, the vision of Chinese people to be the Chinese government as well, like them to be linked hand in hand. And I think,
right.
Yeah, and I think, that is kind of, as Noto said, that reinforces the legitimacy. He wants people to be out there kind of speaking about the Chinese government as if it is the Chinese people, because if you kind of make that connection, you don't try to separate it, that helps him, that helps his government kind of maintain legitimacy. So I thought that was kind of interesting that you said that, because, you're doing it as a courtesy to those who don't support it, but he would actually want that because that would kind of, further legitimacy of the Chinese government.
I feel like it's during the, what was that, 文化大革命, what's that called in English? 文化大革命, the Cultural Revolution, where a lot of Chinese people waving the red books. It's almost that kind of scene he's trying to repeat. It's becoming more obvious. You might have more opinion.
Yeah, I think so. His words may be the reflection on the real power struggle that's happening within the party, and he wants to paint the picture that it is, the party, China is one strong rock, one monolith. So maybe that's that.
But thank you for your comment, Jimmy.
Thank you. Thank you as well.
Like a short addition, if I may, maybe we outsiders, especially coming from democracies, we wonder how the people are not interested to voice out their opinion, right? I mean, the majority, I'm saying, not voicing out to the Chinese leadership about their grievances, about their demands, and so on and so forth. What my conclusion is that they have the party has established a level of trust, so thus they don't need to do that, right? They don't need to voice out their opinion because they trust the government that they protect the population. Yeah, I'm done speaking.
Thank you. We'll be happy to welcome you again next week at the same time, 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. With this, again, thank you very much for coming, for joining the discussion, for listening, being in the room throughout. Well, I wish you a great day. Please stay safe as well, because there are torrential rains and there are a lot of landslides in the country as well. And have a great day. So we'll see you next time again. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.
Thanks for sponsoring this show. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Hi. Thank you.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.